about top-down programming, and it's a technique that programmers use, and it really helps flesh out all the different components of a larger problem, and you just do one little bit at a time. So it's like taking one step at a time, and it's very helpful, and it saves a lot of time in the end, and it actually makes you feel more in control, and it's much more empowering than trying to do the whole thing at once and feeling overwhelmed. And I think that you guys have noticed that it's really hard to debug and fix your programs if you don't know where the problem could be. So by doing this top-down programming, you test as you go, so you know that one section works before you move on to the next section. So you never feel that overwhelming sense of like needle in a haystack and you can't figure out where the problem is. So big problems, again, sometimes people think an idea is too big and they don't know where to start and they get really frustrated. And this leads to either sometimes people avoid doing what they're supposed to be doing because they feel so overwhelmed, or they feel so frustrated that it makes them feel a little bit angry, or they just give up altogether. And some people, try and plug away, and that's a great thing. But if you try and plug away, sometimes you work really hard but you're working in the wrong direction because you didn't think ahead of time about what to do. So I want everyone to start trying to break problems out first. So what I want you to notice is when you have a really big problem, like, wow, there's all these little parts that I can break it up into. And by breaking things up into little tiny parts, it makes it much more manageable. So the squirrel says, you're nuts, it can't be that easy, but it can be that easy. So we want you to just work with one piece at a time once you break it up. It is that easy. So we're going to test out a problem, and this problem mirrors what you will see in your book for exercise problem 4.2. It's not the same problem because I want you to apply your knowledge to a new situation. But you could work this out yourself, so you could practice while you're watching the video. You can pause it and try it yourself. Or you can just watch the problem and see if you can apply it to the problem in the book. So for this problem, we're practicing everything that we've covered already in the previous chapters. So we're practicing creating methods that invoke other methods. You guys did this with the time exercise, and creating methods that take parameters. Again, you did that with the time exercise. Practice using conditionals, which is a little bit new for you. Practice using the keyboard input using the Java scanner, which you've seen, but you don't have a lot of practice with. And then practice returns. So a return is a way to stop a program. You put the return in and then it just stops. And we're going to do more things with returns in the upcoming weeks. Okay, so in addition to your main method, you need to have 3 additional methods. So you're going to have one called candy, one called gum, and one called treat type. And the main method is just going to call treat type, so it's just going to be a call and that's it. It's not going to send any parameters there, but the other ones are going to take parameters for number and flavor. So candy and gum are going to take the parameters. It says each method here. I made a mistake. And then the treat type method on the right hand side of your screen, it's going to prompt the user for the type of treat they want. So they're going to press 1 for candy, 2 for gum, and 0 if they don't want any treat. And this is going to use the Java scanner. You're also going to add in, if the user enters 0, you're going to return immediately. And so that's just going to stop the program. If they don't want a treat, we don't want to ask them about the kind of treat. We don't want to ask them any questions. So the purpose of the scanner and asking for these numbers is your answers or the questions you're going to ask the user is going to be completely different depending upon what they want. I'm not going to ask if they want candy if they want bubblegum flavored candy, because they don't really have bubblegum flavored candy. Maybe you can find a piece, but it's not very common. And then we're going to use the conditionals to decide if they do want candy. Well, I'm going to ask them certain questions if they want candy, and I'm going to ask them different questions if they want gum. And if they don't want anything, I'm going to do something totally different. So that's the reason why you would use the Java scanner, is because you don't know what the user is going to put in, and you have no idea, but you have some idea in your end, like if they do this, then I'm going to do something different. So you're going to execute, your code's going to execute differently depending upon how they answer, but you don't know ahead of time how they're going to answer, and that's why we use variables, and that's why we use this Java scanner, because it gives us some flexibility. All right, so you're like, what? Super confusing. It's not as confusing as it seems when you stop and breathe and break it down. So here we go. We're going to break it down. So the first step is we're just going to create the basic format in NetBeans. And so we're going to think about all the methods that are required for the problem. So we go back to the original. It tells us that we need the main method, and we need 3 additional methods. So we're just going to set that up, and we're going to do that right now. Here's my NetBeans screen, and I just created a new file, and I called it treats to solve my problem. And this is what it should look like when everyone opens up their file. And I'm just going to highlight right here where it says I'm supposed to put my coding logic. And I know from the project instructions that it said that I needed to call, the main method just calls treat type. So I have always up on the side, maybe I split my screen, I just copied into notes here so that you guys wouldn't see a whole bunch of messy windows, but I usually just have the messy windows for me. And so I'm just going to call treat type, and I'm following the naming conventions. And that's all I have to do in the main method. So my main method's done. Now you notice it put an error here and it underlined it. I'm not doing anything with that. It's an error because it can't find this method yet because I didn't create it yet because I'm still typing. So I just ignore it for now. So I hit enter after the method because I want everything in the class, every method has to be indented in the class. And so then this curly brace here closes the class. So I know that when I click on it, it shows me the corresponding curly brace. And so I know this is where I need to go because this curly brace ends the main method. And so so I have the first method there. Now I need to do another one. So I have to type public static. And I'm not a great typist, but that's okay. Void instead of main, this time I need to do, let's do treat type first. I was going to do candy first, but the way my mind works, and I'm going to put the parentheses, and then I have the curly brace and the other curly brace. So I like to go more sequentially. You don't have to, but I think it's easier to read the program that way. And I left just a space in there. Now I'm going to do another method. And you know what? Because we saw how great my typing was, how long it took me, I'm just going to hit copy and paste. And that one's going to be for the candy. It's going to give me errors because it's not going to like I have multiple ones. And that's the third one. All right, so one's going to be called candy. And one is going to be called gum. So there's nothing in any of my programs quite yet. Any of my methods quite yet, but I have the basic format, and that is the first step that I do each time. All right, now that we have that set up, we need to remember what we know about Java Scanner because there's some things that they're saying about Java Scanner, and I remember that I need to import it. So these are my notes that I had from Java Scanner. So first I have to import it, and there's a particular way to do that. I have to put this first line here, import java util.util.scanner, and I need to put that up above the class. And then the scanner reader, I need to use this line of code before I can start using the scanner. And then the last piece that I had to review in my notes, and again, all of this is on page 47 in your textbook, is there's 3 different kinds of readers. Now this next reader, I didn't say this in the textbook, but I looked at the code of the week and it referenced this. And so that's where we got this information from. And so the format you can see is pretty much the same. I'm getting the information from the reader, and then I'm looking at the next thing that the person types in. And then the last part is what changes. So it just says next if it's a string variable. It says int, and the I is capitalized because, again, this is 2 words put together. So we follow our normal techniques of the second or any subsequent word after the first word has a capital letter. And that's for readability. And that's for the int variables. And then for doubles, we have the word double here. So that's sort of the format. And from this, we're going to also think about, in the next step, of how we want the treat method to work. And so basically I'm thinking I want to ask the person what kind of treat they'd like, and I'm going to tell them they could have 3 options. They could have candy, they could have gum, or they could have none. Now that I've reviewed to make sure that I remember everything I need to know about the Java scanner, since it's a new concept for me, I'm going to refer back to the book. So I went back to page 47, and as you know, I had my notes, so I put everything right next to me when I'm going to do my coding. So the first thing I have to do is import the Java scanner utility. And I know I have to do that above the class, but inside the package. So here I go. I'm going to type import space Java util.scanner and then a semicolon. Oops, and look what I did. I have 3 N's in scanner. That won't work. Okay, I think I have that right. No, it's just the yellow light bulb. Now I'm going to come down because all of this is going to happen in the treat type code. So the first thing I need to do is I need to put a second line. I need to sort of, now that the scanner's been imported, I have to initialize it. So it's going to work in this section of code. So scanner reader equals new scanner, and I have to type system.in because it is input. This is how I'm going to get input in, and I need to put my semicolon, and once I did that, the error went away. So the first thing I need to do is I need to do a print line on the screen because I need to ask the user what it is they want to get for their treat. So I'm going to say, not scanner, system out print line. And notice when I type wrong, the colors change weird, but then it goes back to the green. It goes back to the colors we expect. So I'm going to say, my question is going to be, what kind of treat would you like? And actually, I'm going to do 2 lines of code for this. Just because I think it'll look nicer, but it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to say press 1 for candy, 2 for gum, or 0 for none. Okay, so I'm going to have 2 print lines, and I'm going to run that to see how that looks. What kind of treat would you like? Press 1 for candy, 2 for gum, or 0 for none. Perfect. So that part of the code worked. Now I know that I could add in some variables. So I think I need to create a new variable, and it's going to be an integer if I'm going to take numbers, right? These are all whole numbers, 1, 2, 0. So I know it's going to be int, and I'm going to call this treat type. And it is going to be equal to, over here, since it's an integer, so the variable name I'm going to call treat type, I have to type reader next int, and that's for integer, because it's going to get everything from the reader. And I put the period, and I want the next integer, whoops, not next byte, next integer that is typed. I want to use that and populate this treat type field. And I'm going to put in a little test line to see if it actually worked. So I'm going to, and I can delete this out later, but I'm going to do a little print line statement, and I'm just going to print treat type. And the reason I'm going to do that, and I can click and I can see treat type is being initialized here, and then I'm going to print it here, and it's going to be filled with what it gets from the reader. So I'm doing that just so I can see that the program is working properly. So I'm going to hit the play button again. So it says, what kind of treat would you like? Press 1 for candy, 2 for gum, 0 for none. So I'm going to press 1, and it prints 1 down there, so I know that that worked. All right, we're moving on to step 4, and this section talks about using returns and conditionals. So the first thing is, we had those 3 sections before in step 3, and I just want to pick one of them. So you don't want to do all 3 at once. I want to do one at a time. So I'm going to pick the if they press 0, because I want to do that return first. You could have picked another one first. Whatever you pick first, you just do that one first. So I reviewed my notes on statements and conditionals and make sure I had the right, so I know that a return, you need a semicolon after it. And conditionals, I had to remember about the chained conditionals and how I'm going to put those in. And then I'm going to program this section. So basically I've mapped out, I want, if they press 0, I'm going to give them a print line. And then I'm going to return. So the directions don't ask for a print line. I threw that in because for me, I think it looks a little bit nicer, but you don't have to do that. And you'll see the coding next. Okay, so I'm back trying to show you what to do for step 4. And I noticed a problem when I had done steps 2 and 3 that I did not indent this code. And so you can see I have moved it over. When I originally did my treat type, I just didn't tab in when I put all of my code in there, and it just looked funny to me. And now I can see that it was not indented. And the reason that we're indenting is because now we're getting into our conditional statements. And I already typed it in because I'm a slow typist. So basically this says if, and then if my variable treat type, and we know treat type is here, and we initialize it here, and then we're using it for print line statement here, and actually I'm going to take that print line statement out, but then I have the double equal signs, because remember, if we're testing for a condition, we have to have 2 equal signs, because we always use 1 equal sign when we give a value to our variable. So we can't use the same thing twice. That's why you have 2 equal signs. So if the variable treat type is equal to 0, and we know 0 means we don't want any, I decided to put a print line in. So my print line says, your dentist will be happy with your choice. And then just a return. So a return statement, that's just going to stop the program. And this is probably the easiest one for us to test out. So I decided to do this one first. And plus 0 is numerically before number 1 and number 2. But again, you can do it in any order, but you want to just break it up so you're only doing one section of code at a time. So I have this. It looks good. Again, I have my information to the side that helps me. And I'm just going to hit the compile and run button. And it's not working. Why are you not working? There we go. All right, what kind of treat would you like? Press 1 for candy, 2 for gum, or 0 for none. So we're going to test it. We're going to press 0 and enter. And it printed that 0 for the print line. And remember, I wanted to delete that, and I forgot to do it. And it prints the line, your dentist will be happy with your choice, and the program ends. So that's good news. That works. This also reminds me that I forgot to delete this print line statement out that I was just using as a test. So I'm going to delete that out. All right, so our first conditional statement works, and so now I know I can work on another one. Now that we know that the code works, if the user presses 0, we're going to try another section of the code. So this is step 5, and I picked to work on the candy section, which is if they press 1. So if the user presses 1, which means they want candy, I need to think about the variables that I would like to have. So I have a string variable named flavor because they're typing words, and I have an integer named num candy because it's going to tell me how many candies they want. So the first print line is, which flavor of candy do you want? I want them to type either chocolate or fruit. And depending upon what they type, what's going to happen right here is going to be the scanner that's going to take what they type and it's going to populate the variable. So this is going to populate the flavor, and then they're going to do another print line statement. It's going to ask them how many candy bars they would like, and that's going to populate num candy when I have my scanner here. I'm going to read that. And then finally, I need to call the candy method, and I'm going to send parameters to it, and I'm going to send the parameter of flavor, and I'm going to send num candy. So this is, I'm going to call it here, and then I'm going to make sure that the receiving method has 2 receiving variables, and they need 2 receiving parameters, and it needs to match. So if I'm sending flavor down and my flavor is a string variable, my receiving parameter has to also be string. Num candy, I'm sending it down, it's an integer. My receiving parameter has to also be an integer. If you don't have them being the same type, then your program is not going to work. So that's an important concept to keep in mind. All right, so after we do the first section, now we're going to add the parameters. And so the parameters that I'm going to accept are flavor and the number. So you noticed, I'm going to go back here, when I send the parameters, I just send the parameter names because I've already talked about it already knows what type these are because I've been using it in my code and I declared them in this particular method. So I don't need to tell the program what these are. But these parameters have not been used in the new method, so I have to tell them what type they are. So that's a very important step. So you can see when you send it, it looks a little bit different than when you receive it. So I'm going to get the string variable of flavor, and then this one's going to just be called number. And I wanted to do this just to show you that the parameters, because variables are local, they only exist in the method where they were created right now. That's all you know about. And in this instance, I'm using the same name for the string variable that's called flavor, but the other one was called num candy, and now I'm just going to call it number in this method. And so what it's just going to do, it's going to put that in there, and it's changing the name of it, how it's going to work in this program, but the value is the same. So I did that variables, and I have to declare a couple new variables. So I'm going to put price in there because the price of candy is different than the price of gum. So I have that in there. And then the total due is going to be a calculated field. So I'm going to use the number parameter that's brought down. And then the price is something that I'm setting within this method. And I'm going to put what they're going to multiply, and that's going to be a new variable. And that's going to be the calculation of how much it costs. And then I'm going to do a print line, and I'm going to say, I'm going to put the variable number, and I'm going to say the number pieces of, and then it's going to have the flavor, will cost, and then it's going to be the total due. So you can see I had to put pluses in between everything to concatenate this information together. So I'm including some variable information, and I'm just adding some text in there to make it more readable for the user. Okay, I am ready to do my next statement, my next conditional. So if I ran through the first part of the code and I ended up typing 1, the code would say, okay, if treat type, well, it does not equal 0, it's 1. So I hop down to my next line of code. So now it's going to say else if treat type equals 1. In this instance, it's going to be yes. So we're going to print out a print statement. Which flavor of candy? Type chocolate or fruit. And then there's a new variable called flavor. It is a string variable, and it's going to read the next thing that I type in, and it's going to populate that. And then I should get another print statement. And notice these are print statements and not print lines, and that's because I want the answer to be typed on the same line as the question. So it's going to put how many candy bars would you like. There's a space in there, so it's automatically going to put a little space between that where I'm going to type my answer. And then I make a new integer called num candy, and it's going to read the next integer that's typed in after this question, and it's going to fill that variable. So the variable is going to whatever I type in. And then I'm going to do a call to a function. So I'm calling the candy function, and I'm setting down 2 parameters, flavor and num candy. So when I go down to my candy method here, I need to say what type the first is, and I'm calling it's a string variable, and it's called flavor. So flavor to flavor, and I have a new integer, and it's called number right now, and I'm setting num candy, and it's going to then turn into this method. Whatever the num candy value is now going to be called number in this variable, because as we know, variables are local and they don't travel from method to method unless you send them in the form of a parameter. So if I didn't send this information down here, it wouldn't exist down here. So down in this method, I also have, I set the price of a candy bar to 89 cents, and I've created a new variable called total due, and this is a calculated field. So this is a sometimes they call them temporary variables, but I'm setting that up only to hold my calculation, and it's going to take the variable number, which I'm getting from my parameters, and it's going to take price, which I'm getting over here from that new variable that I've created, and it's going to calculate to get total due. It's multiplication. Then I'm going to print line, and it's going to say, it's going to have the variable number plus, I'm going to concatenate the words pieces of, and then it's going to have the flavor, which I'm getting from up here, from I sent down in a parameter. Candy will cost, and then it's going to get the total due, which is that calculated field. So I'm going to hit run, compile and run, and see what happens. All right, so what kind of treat would I like? Press 1 for candy, 2 for gum, or 0 for none. So notice on this one, I did print lines instead of print statements, so that's why it's popping down to the next line. So I might change that. Which flavor of candy would I like? Well, I like chocolate the best. So I'm typing chocolate, and I hit enter. How many candy bars would I like? I would like to have 4 candy bars for everyone in my family. So 4 pieces of chocolate candy will cost $3.56. Okay, so I'm gonna now go up because I don't like the first statement. I don't mind being a print line because I want it. That's fine because this one would be okay to be underneath it. But for this, I want it to be a print statement. So I'm going to hit compile and run again. So I would like to have 1 for candy. Oh, and look though, I didn't put a nice space after that. So I'm going to have to fix that. What flavor of candy? This time I'm going to try fruit. And how many candy bars would I like? So I'm going to try a different number this time. I'm going to say 2. So 2 pieces of fruit candy will cost $1.78. So the spacing looks good here, it looks good here, and looks good here. I screwed it up here. I'm going to maybe put a colon here instead of a period and hit space. So now it's going to look a little bit better when I run it next time. I'm not going to test it now because that was just a very minor change. I'll test it in the next round. But as you can see, I'm doing little bits of code, testing, and then moving on to the next bit of code. And that's how you should do your program. Now we're on to the next section. And this section, again, works very similarly to the last section. So I'm not going to read through all of the details, but you can see they're going to press 2 for gum, and then it's going to ask what flavor of gum do they want. And they can either have mint, bubble, or fruit. And I'm going to ask them how many packs they would like. And then I'm going to call the gum method. So this mirrors exactly what we did for the other code. It's the same logic. This time, however, we have num gum instead of num candy. All right, for step 8, we're going to add the parameters for our gum section of code. And we're receiving a string variable, and we're receiving an integer. And again, the number one I changed, but the flavor I kept the same for the name. I have to declare 2 variables again. I'm going to declare price, and I'm going to declare total due. Now notice I used price as a variable before and total due in my other method for candy. I have to declare them again because, again, variables are local to the method where they're created. So these do not exist. So you might think, Mrs. Donahue, we put these in the program. That doesn't work. You didn't have it in this method, so you have to declare them again unless you're passing them as parameters. And we're going to do another print line statement. And again, I've concatenated, I have variables concatenated with text, and that's just for readability for the user. So let's look to see how that comes out in NetBeans. I'm ready for my next section of code. So now I have to get to number 2 for gum, which I have not done that yet. So I'm still working within the treat type method. And this time I am just going to highlight the candy section of code, copy it, and I'm going to paste underneath it. And that's because I've been testing as I go, so I know this code is solid, and I know I'm a slow typer, so I'm just going to go through and make some changes to it. So this code is for the gum as a treat, and this time the treat type would be equal to 2, and which flavor of gum is what I want, and they can type mint, bubble, or fruit. And so it's going to still put it in the flavor category. It's going to read the next, it's going to use the reader, and it's going to use next, which is going to be the string, which is good. And then it's going to print out how many, instead of candy bars, what I like. I want it to say packs. And instead of num candy, it's going to be num gum. And num gum is going to be populated from the reader, and it's going to be the next integer. And then I'm going to call the gum function, and I'm going to send down flavor. And notice it's turned red because it knows there's no num candy. Now it's going to go down to num gum. And that's still turning red, and it's giving me an error message, and that's just because I am sending parameters, but I didn't set the parameters up in here yet. So I'm going to set them up right now. So it's going to be a string for flavor. And then I'm going to do an integer for number. So it's taking the same parameters So you're going to see there is a little bit of repetition in my code. So this is not a superly well designed program, nor is that a greatly worded statement. That's okay. Here we go, but the price is going to be different. So I probably would have made a different method and sent more parameters down, but I was trying to match more closely what you have to do in the book. And this is going to be a little bit easier than the book, but it has a lot of the things that you were doing. All right, so for this one, I'm doing, that's for gum. The price is $1.19. So the total due is still going to be the number times the price. And this time I'm going to print out number pieces of, instead of saying candy, this is going to say gum. Okay, so that looks like it would work. So we're going to try and run it again. And so now I want 2 for gum. And which flavor of gum do I want? Mint, bubble, or fruit? I'm going to have a minty flavor today. How many packs would I like? My son loves gum, so I'm going to put 6 packs of gum. So 6 pieces of mint gum will cost $7.14. Now before we went, that looks like it's good, and I am going to do just a quick guesstimate. So that's $6 and then 19 cents times 6. So that looks about right. So you always want to just sort of make a guesstimate, make sure it looks like it's in the ballpark, and that it does look like it's in the ballpark. And so that part of my code is working now. Except I have a little error down here, so let's see what it doesn't like. Oh, when I just typed my 2, I was typing in my program and not in my code. So I made that mistake. Sometimes when you compile and run, I'll do it again. I don't know why, but sometimes it doesn't put my cursor here. And I typed into the code, and so I made an error message by accident. So I just went and fixed it, so it was no big deal. Those types of things will happen, so make sure you are aware. If you all of a sudden have an error message that you didn't before, it could be something very simple. And so mouse over the error to help you. All right, so now the final step is we test the entire program. We did the whole thing. We did it by small little bits. It was very manageable. We test and run the whole program. Sometimes when you're actually programming, sometimes there's testers that work in your department that do the testing for you, and sometimes you're testing your own code and you're trying to break it and make sure everything works appropriately. And then obviously, if you have an error, you're going to fix it. Sometimes because you've coded as you went, you might not have as many errors. That's usually the idea of doing the top-down programming, but you will still see things you need to change, and so you're just going to fix them as you go. The last thing is you're going to make sure that you've commented on the blocks of code, and you should kind of be doing that as you go, but maybe afterwards as you run the whole thing, then you can say, oh, okay, like this, I could put some information in here. And comments are tricky. You don't want to just, blindly comment every single thing. If it's obvious, you don't need to comment on it. So that's why we try and do blocks of code, so it just sort of makes sense. And sometimes you code from a long time ago, and then it's helpful because then you can go back and you can say, oh yeah, that's similar to what I'm doing now, and you can copy the sections of code you've already written and make your life a lot easier. And then you're always, of course, going to check for good coding practice. You want to make sure your variables are named appropriately, that they make sense, that you're following the capitalization rules of having the first word lowercase and every subsequent word have a capital letter. You're looking for alignment, and as you can see, because we added these conditionals in, alignment becomes much more critical than it has in the past programs. So that's why we wanted to learn it early and get in that good practice of having everything line up. All right, and then you get to celebrate for a job well done, and I hope that this helps you and that you use this technique going forward.